Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 49 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 10th, 2022, the committee is meeting on Bill C-19, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7th, 2022, and other measures. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10th, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask except for members who are at their place during proceedings. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I request that members and witnesses mutually treat each other with respect and decorum. I would now like to welcome today's witnesses. From the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, we have with us Mike Mueller, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome. From International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, we have David Chartrand, Canadian General Vice President. As an individual, we have Stephen Tobin, who's the Chief Executive Officer of LabourX. From the Business Council of Alberta, Michael Holden is with us, the Vice President of Policy and also the Chief Economist. From the C.D. Howe Institute, we have Benjamin Dawkins, who's the Associate Vice President of Public Affairs, and William B.P. Robson, Chief Executive Officer, although I am told that William Robson will only be with us till 4:30, members, so just be aware of that. From the Canadian Labour Congress, we have Siobhan Vipond, who's the Executive Vice President. And we also have with us Chris Roberts, Director of Social and Economic Policy. From the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Daniel Rubenstein, who's the Senior Director, Policy and Government Relations, is with us today. We'll now begin with Mr. Mueller from the Aerospace Industry Association of Canada for his opening remarks of up to 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here on behalf of the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada. And our members represent over 95% of aerospace activity in Canada, covering the civil, defense, and space sectors. And I'm especially happy to see that David Chartrand is also appearing today. David and I have worked closely on the significant concerns we both have regarding the Select Luxury Items Tax Act, and specifically the negative impact it will have on the industry and the workers. Despite perhaps being well-intentioned, the tax as currently drafted will penalize manufacturers and Canadian workers. To be clear, this is a tax on manufacturing. And by forcing manufacturers to pay this substantial tax, it will render Canadian manufacturers less competitive, directly translating into lost business and lost jobs. In fact, the industry estimates losses of over 1,000 Canadian jobs and potentially up to $1 billion in lost revenue to companies across the country. This tax will not just affect large companies, it will have an impact on companies of all sizes in all regions throughout the Canadian supply chain. We are told that some manufacturers are already experiencing order cancellations due to this potential tax. This tax puts our industry at a significant disadvantage compared to international competitors, and it comes at a time when they're still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, where 30,000 workers lost their jobs. Lessons can be learned from other countries that introduce such a tax only to ultimately repeal it because of the significant damage it caused to their domestic manufacturing sectors. This was seen in the US in the early 90s, where a similar tax was introduced, only to be repealed 2 years later. While political marketing of a luxury tax may sound good from a political perspective, the reality for those of us in the industry is the complete opposite. Rather, I would encourage members of this committee to focus on the economics and how we can protect and grow the jobs here in Canada and support an industry trying to recover. This tax does the opposite. We have been asking the government to conduct all the necessary economic analysis to ensure the impact of this legislation will not be detrimental to the industry in Canada and our employees from coast to coast. It is our understanding that no review was completed with respect to this tax. As such, we're asking aircraft to be removed from this legislation. If the government is determined to forge ahead despite the negative impacts, it should be open to amendments to soften the impacts on the industry. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance has stated that this legislation may need improvement and says she wants to work with industry to resolve the issues. And we have recommendations to help mitigate the impacts, and we've shared these with the government. Let's not crush domestic demand in the manufacture and final assembly of business aircraft, helicopters, turboprops, and jets, not to mention the associated supply chain for parts, systems, services, as well as maintenance, repair, and operations. The real question is, why put this at risk? And I should say it's a real frustration to our members that in Budget 2021, the budget that first introduced this tax, in that same budget, the government recognized the industry was hit hard by the pandemic and provided significant funding to the industry to help it recover. And then on the other hand, implementing this tax. This tax will damage a national strength of an industry that is still working toward recovery and making tremendous strides when it comes to green innovation. No other jurisdiction is doing this. Our loss will be a gain to U.S. aerospace and other competitor nations who want what we have. All policy levers should be pulled in the same direction to support the recovery of this strategic sector. And that's also why our industry has been calling for a national aerospace strategy. Having a coordinated plan for this industry would avoid this kind of situation. We need to leverage our strengths, not penalize them. If this tax is implemented as it's currently designed, it will be Canadian businesses and workers that will pay the price. There is an opportunity in front of us to get it right. Thank you very much for your time, your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Now we'll hear from the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the committee for giving the IAM some time to voice our concerns on behalf of labor within this industry. We represent thousands of members in SMEs and OEMs in this important sector of the Canadian economy across Canada and in multiple provinces. Although as labor, we do support any government's goal to address income inequality, we strongly believe that this tax is misdirected towards manufacturing. We do not believe this was the government's original intent, nor that it reflects what was announced during the campaigning. But the fact is that jobs will inevitably be affected adversely by this tax. Manufacturing has suffered greatly over the last decade, and the recovery of our sector will further be punished through this tax. The tax will put an added burden on our sector, which has already lost almost 30,000 jobs just in 2020. We believe the negative impact on jobs and on our industry far outweighs any benefit that would come from this tax. I, for one, do not understand why our country would do the opposite of all other countries in this sector. Protectionism is at an all-time high, and countries are protecting their industries while we're headed in an opposite direction. This tax will make us less competitive globally, will take some of the shine away from our country and our industry. It will tarnish our reputation as a world leader and as a great country to build and service business aircraft. We need to support this industry and limit barriers to our competitiveness. This tax is contradictory to recent investments which government has made in this industry to strengthen, grow, and make it more resilient. It is as if you're giving with one hand and taking away with the other. As Mike mentioned, we should learn a lesson from the concrete examples which exist where this type of tax has failed government, workers, and their communities. And we're talking about the boating and the business in this aircraft industry in the United States. Finally, there's been no study or assessment done on the impact this tax would have on jobs versus the benefits it would bring. We feel this is a necessary step that has been skipped and that must be done in order to determine the impact on jobs. I appeal to this committee and government to please consider this important impact that this will have on jobs and communities. We believe there's 4 questions to ask ourselves. Are we putting Canadian companies at a disadvantage globally versus competitors? To us, the answer is clear. It's yes. Will this tax generate a loss in sales? Absolutely. Would this translate into job loss? If you're selling less aircraft, you're manufacturing less aircraft, you've got less jobs. Do other competitor countries have such a tax? They did. They learned from their mistakes and they repealed these taxes and modified them. So the answer to that is no. Again, I want to stress that this tax would apply to a limited number of manufacturers whose businesses rely heavily on production of business jets. Not only would these businesses carry the liability of paying the tax, but if the tax rendered them less competitive, consumers of this type of good would turn to competitors. Business aircraft is a strength for Canada, providing a solid foundation for recovery and jobs, and should not be punished in a misdirected effort that will target manufacturers and workers. If applied in its current form, the tax may be a disincentive for business to continue doing business in Canada, or even to consider Canada as an option to establish operations. For decades, Canada's aerospace industry has not only had a competitive advantage due to a number of factors, but also provided incentives to business to continue operating here. So why would we go and do something different in this case? The federal government has looked to stimulate a recovery in aerospace. This tax could unintentionally affect manufacturing jobs. And in this subsector across Canada, in effect, the luxury tax is somewhat contradictory to the intent of recent investments in aerospace. So for these reasons, I thank you for this opportunity, and I'd be glad to answer any questions. I would like to also let you know that we'll be sending a detailed brief to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chartrand. Thank you. And now we'll hear from, as an individual, Stephen Tobin, who's with us here in the room.
Thank you, Chair, et merci aux autres membres de le comité. Today I wanted to focus
Thank you to other members of the committee.
Job market, so cutting across a number of themes. And I wanted to pay particular attention to the issue of persistent labor and skill shortages. I think in thinking about the bill, initiatives like the Labor Mobility Deduction Program and others like it, I think are important steps and a welcome recognition for employers who are having difficulties finding talent, especially in the trades sector. But despite some of the headline stories with respect to labor and skill shortages and low unemployment that we're seeing in Canada, I nevertheless still want to emphasize the point that many Canadians still struggle to find quality jobs today. To harness and leverage the ongoing and planned initiatives and to create quality jobs for Canadians and to spur investment among businesses, I would offer up to the committee the following 2 sort of considerations. The first is we need a comprehensive labor market strategy that supports and aligns with other economic, environmental, and social outcomes. A well-functioning labor market is a cross-cutting issue. We may hear it throughout the other interventions today, and it is needed in other areas to support these objectives. Simply put, our goals to improve competitiveness, address housing affordability, transition to a lower carbon economy will not succeed if businesses and government cannot find the people and the talent to make those investments and transitions a reality. A comprehensive strategy can bring together in a coherent and mutually reinforcing way the various pieces that augment each of the individual actions that are planned. A strategy of this nature is also a great and tremendous opportunity to bring together governments, employers, labor, educators, training providers, and others to think collaboratively and cohesively how to discuss these opportunities and challenges. A strategy is thus not about new measures or new spending, but it's about making the most of the investments that are planned. The second point I wanted to make is I believe we need to get serious about addressing labor and skill shortages. This should be a key pillar of any broad labor market strategy and requires our collective attention. A few points for consideration on where to start with respect to persistent labor and skill shortages. The first is we need to recognize the difference between a labor shortage on one hand and a skill shortage on the other. These are not the same issue, and they require very different policy interventions. We need to diagnose the problem first before we design a solution. The extent of labor versus skills shortages is different across the country. It's not the same in my home rural Cape Breton town as it is in Toronto. We need an action plan that properly diagnoses the problem across the country before we think properly about the solution. To do that, a few suggestions, again, very cost effective, would be to streamline and promote more open access to existing sources of information, such as job vacancies and EI recipients. All of this must be done, of course, while being mindful of privacy considerations, quality of information, data quality, but I assure you it can be done. The third point under this strategy would be a cohesive and integrated approach to skills development. Here, too, I want to emphasize that skills are not the same as qualifications or credentials, and for far too long, we have equated the two. Much of our programming and even way in which we collect information and data is rooted in the old way of thinking, that is, qualifications and credentials and not skills. The good news here is that there have been significant investments in the past few years in the space of skills. However, a comprehensive labor market strategy that includes testing and evaluating innovative approaches and partnerships in skills development would help make the most of those investments. And finally, I would offer the following comment for the committee is that I believe we need to strengthen our culture of evaluation. No matter what new measure or policy we implement or attempt, we should make every effort to the extent possible as part of that framework to include evaluation, one that goes beyond just monitoring, but one that is about did the program work or didn't work? And finally, from my international experience, I would say in Canada, I think we need to be more open in terms of accepting when something doesn't work. We can learn a lot from what doesn't work, but we need to think more strategically about how we integrate evaluation into all of the various initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tobin. And from Cape Breton, we're going over to Alberta, and many of us were watching the games last night. Very exciting, and they maybe stayed up a little too late, but we have the Business Council of Alberta, and we have Michael Holden with us for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The game was exciting, although I contend that we got not my desired result. But I'm pleased to be here this afternoon on behalf of the Business Council of Alberta. We are a nonpartisan, for-purpose organization comprised of the province's largest enterprise chief executives and leading entrepreneurs. Our members represent the majority of Alberta's private sector investment, job creation, exports, and research and development. We're dedicated to building a better and more prosperous Alberta within a strong Canada. And my comments this afternoon will focus on selected components of the 2022 budget organized across three key themes. The first theme is decarbonization and a clean energy future. With the right policies in place, Alberta businesses can and want to play an essential leadership role in reducing emissions domestically and globally. What is needed is clear, long-term market-based policy certainty to accelerate the pace and scale of major investments, as well as policy that reflects important regional differences across Canada. To these ends, we were happy to see a number of supporting initiatives in the budget. The introduction of the refundable carbon capture investment tax credit, the proposed $15 billion Canada Growth Fund, and the broadening of the Canada Infrastructure Bank's mandate to include support of private sector investment into hydrogen and carbon capture infrastructure are all important steps forward. However, a few pieces were missing. First, decarbonizing Alberta's economy in time to meet Paris targets will require a massive acceleration of project approval and regulatory timelines. Yet the current regulatory process is slow and inefficient, and reforming it was not a priority item in this budget. One option that could help would be to create a regulatory nexus card to fast-track approvals for trusted project proponents and for major decarbonization projects. Second, the budget missed an important opportunity to support emissions-displacing exports of liquefied natural gas. The global need for LNG has been highlighted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how high costs and limited energy access have forced countries to revert to higher emitting alternatives like coal. Beyond this, the budget overlooked some other opportunities to support the low carbon energies and solutions of tomorrow. One is immediately expanding capital cost deduction allowances for a wider range of opportunities like geothermal power and bitumen beyond combustion. Another is establishing Alberta as the world's living lab for industrial clean tech solutions. With concerted long-term federal investments, Alberta has the existing asset base and skills to create and export valuable global solutions. Theme 2 is a long-term growth strategy built on innovation and productivity. Productivity is a key determinant of long-term economic growth, and the Business Council has long been concerned about Canada's lagging productivity levels relative to its OECD peers. With that in mind, we were looking for the budget to include a long-term growth strategy built on innovation and an improved policy environment that encourages business investment and scaling. We were happy to see several such initiatives in the budget, in particular, progress on establishing a Council of Economic Advisors, the Canadian Innovation and Investment Agency modeled after DARPA, the announcement of reviews on modernizing and simplifying tax support for R&D, intellectual property, and the SHRED program, and finally, the proposal to more gradually phase out access to the small business tax rate. That said, details on many of these initiatives are lacking, making it difficult to comment on them beyond stating that the ideas, at least, are welcome, and we look forward to working with the government as it fleshes out these proposals. My final theme is developing the workforce needed for the economy of tomorrow. Automation, technology development, the energy transition, and the pandemic have converged to create stubbornly high long-term unemployment levels in Alberta. We were looking for the budget to provide a direct federal contribution to employment insurance to incentivize skills upgrades and an annual top-up to the Canada-Alberta Workforce Development Agreement. We were happy to see the budget include plans to consult on modernizing EI to support workforce retraining programs, even if details were light. The emphasis on underrepresented workers in the labor force and focus on supporting innovative partnerships are critical to shaping a productive and relevant workforce. We are also pleased to see labor supply and mobility measures proposed for trusted employers to access temporary foreign workers, a new tax deduction for relocation and travel expenses for tradespeople, and increased recognition of foreign healthcare worker credentials. However, the budget did not clarify the government's just transition policy priorities. Likewise, the proposed Futures Fund for Regional Economic Diversification and the emissions reduction plan's promise of a clean jobs training center were notably missing. In summary, we believe this budget represents a step forward in several areas important to Alberta's long-term economic prosperity. There's still much work to be done, however, and we look forward to continuing that process. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions when the time comes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Holden. And now we'll go to the C.D. Howe Institute for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'll start off and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ben Dacus. We appreciate you inviting Ben and me to join you here today, and we hope our contributions will help you in your work on the 2022 federal budget and Bill C-19. By way of background, federal fiscal policy is a long-standing area of focus for the C.D. Howe Institute. Our work covers accountability and transparency, macro questions of debt and sustainability, detailed work on taxes, and an annual shadow federal budget. Our opening remarks will necessarily touch only on a few topics, mainly the elements of Bill C-19 dealing with competition issues. We'd be glad to answer questions on a wider range of topics if that's helpful to members of the committee. Although it's applicable to much more than Bill C-19, I hope members will excuse my starting with a high-level comment about budgets and budget implementation bills, and that is that there's too much in them. A budget should be a fiscal document first and foremost, the key financial information, the pre-budget track for revenue expense, the surplus or deficit, and the change in the accumulated surplus or deficit, plus what the budget projections are on those things should be in the first 10 pages. Changes in taxes belong in budgets, as do changes in programs that affect expenses. Other program changes and commentary likely often belong in separate documents. And I have a comment about implementation bills. Even though C-19 deals only with some elements of the 2022 budget, it is a daunting document. Omnibus bills have a bad reputation for good reason, and I mean no disrespect to MPs, rather the opposite. I mean great respect to Parliament when I say that it ought not to be challenging for elected representatives to get on top of the text of a bill itself, let alone to anticipate the regulations and the contingencies and all the consequences. Among the specific items that are mentioned, covered in Bill C-19 that Ben and I would answer questions on if there's interest, would be the luxury tax. I did not know that Messieurs Miller and Chartrand would be appearing on this issue. I think many economists would share the view that specific taxes of this kind are not good taxes. They distort purchases and production, as we've just heard from Mike and David. What they said about aircraft applies equally to motor vehicles and boats. I'm not very enthusiastic about this, but I'll say it anyway. If you think that it's really a good idea to single out specific products and services, use the GST. It's not as good as a low uniform rate on everything consumed, but it has some advantages compared to this. Because Mr. Tobin, and we've just heard also from Michael Holden on labor markets, I'll just quickly mention there that a key test of any labor market policy, notably EI, is whether it impedes or promotes matching of talent with opportunity. As everyone knows, the unemployment rate is at a record low. This is a good time to unwind provisions that encourage people in places or with employers that do not offer opportunities for stable jobs that pay well and offer advancement. We also would be happy if people are interested to answer questions with regard to vaping, prohibition on foreign buyers of residential properties, among other things. But let me just say that competition policy, a major focus of the provisions of C-19, also a major focus for the C.D. Howe Institute. That's particularly my colleague Ben Dacus, who's been introduced already. He's our internal lead on the Institute's Competition Policy Council, and I turn my remaining time over to Ben.
Thank you very much, Bill. The C.D. Howe Institute's Competition Policy Council, which is comprised of top-ranked competition law academics and practitioners, noted its support for the government's intention articulated in Budget 2022 to consult broadly on the role and functioning of the Competition Act and its enforcement regime. But the scope of changes to the Competition Act and the BIA do not fulfill that commitment. The BIA contains major changes that, even if in the right direction, consultation might have improved the outcome. Many more changes, especially on increasing administrative monetary penalties, will be harmful to the Canadian economy and may even be unconstitutional. The government missed key opportunities to consult with the various constituencies affected by the legislation. The government and this committee should reconsider the BIA's approach on Competition Act amendments. Now, if carving Division 15 isn't feasible, which would be my recommendation, the committee should call for, at a minimum, setting the proclamation date for all provisions, not just some, for a year from passage. We also need to hear more from the government on their plans for further consultation, as they have promised. So these proposed changes can then be seen in concert with other proposed changes that would come as part of a prompt second stage of Competition Act reviews. Given my limited time for opening remarks, I'll stop there and leave further discussion of specific problems for questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Dacus. Mr. Robson, I understand, Mr. Robson, you're only here until 4:30. Is that correct? Okay. For the members,
that is correct, yes.
And now we'll hear from the Canadian Labour Congress, please.
Good afternoon, Chair and honourable members. My name is Siobhan Vipond, and I'm Executive Vice President at the Canadian Labour Congress. I am honoured to be joining you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Anishbeg and Algonquin peoples. We at the CLC speak on behalf of working people in Canada in every industry, occupation, and region of the country. The Congress welcomes many aspects of the budget implementation bill. The introduction of a labour mobility tax deduction, improvements to Canada's trade remedy legislation, and restoring the prohibition on wage fixing in the Competition Act are all steps Canada's unions have been urging the government to take. However, there is a great deal that is missing from this bill. Budget 2022 provides an additional $2 billion one-time top-up to provinces and territories for health services. Yet health workers are facing dire staffing shortages and growing burnout, and the bill fails to take urgent action to improve the retention and recruitment needed to address this crisis. Also missing is action to help Canada's care workers, including in early learning and childcare and in long-term care. To appreciate the scale of this problem, in March, Statistics Canada estimated the value of unpaid care at between $515 and $680 billion. The budget takes steps on housing affordability and transit shortfalls, but it falls short of addressing the affordability crisis facing working people. The cost of food, fuel, and shelter has shot up while wages lag far behind. Workers' spending power is falling. Living standards are declining for workers whose real wages are dropping at the fastest rate in memory. Pensioners who lost inflation-protected pensions are seeing their fixed incomes quickly eroded by soaring inflation. The government should be urgently responding to the crisis by taxing corporate super profits, housing speculators, and the concentrated wealth of the richest Canadians, allowing wages to rise by strengthening labor standards and removing barriers to unionization, and strengthening social programs by implementing national pharmacare and dental care and quickly getting childcare fees down, as well as expanding free, high-quality public transit. Instead, the government is ramping up employers' access to vulnerable migrant workers, while the Bank of Canada is preparing to hike interest rates in the hopes that it will cool inflation. These measures are going to hurt working-class households and worsen inequality, while doing nothing to tackle the entrenched power and corporate greed responsible for price gouging and pandemic profiteering. Let me end with some specific recommendations for amending Bill C-19, starting with the EI Board of Appeal. For many years, labour and community organizations have struggled to restore important elements of the EI Board of Referees that were scrapped by Stephen Harper's government in 2012. EI appeals should be heard by worker and employer representatives, people who understand their communities and the realities of workplace life. So instead of the Board of Appeals only reporting to the government, we, Canada's unions, urge the committee to make the Board of Appeals answerable to the entire EI Commission, including both worker and employer representatives. We also urge the parties to restore the Commission's lead role in selecting labour and employer members of the board. Historically, this was done in consultation with the Commission's social partners, which included local labour councils. Workers have a right to regional representation, and the option of an in-person hearing, another key recommendation of the 2018 tripartite review. Establishing accessible, accountable social safety nets like our proposed changes to EI ensures workers have the support they need during turbulent economic periods. In our current climate of economic insecurity, workers must have confidence in the services they receive and the future of their employment. The proposed strategic policy review must not be a Harper-style attack on public service workers that opens the door to cuts and privatization of services workers and families rely on. So thank you and merci. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Vipon. And now we'll hear from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities before we move to the members' questions. And we have Mr. Rubenstein with us here today for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I'm Daniel Rubenstein. I'm Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We're the national voice of Canada's local governments, representing 90% of Canada's population, coast to coast to coast. Nous apprécions chaque occasion de discuter de la
We appreciate every opportunity we have to speak with all levels of government levels to improve the quality of life of people.
2022 and relevant provisions in Bill C-19. Budget 2022 equips local leaders with tools to deliver concrete results in our communities, the places where people live, work, and raise their families. First, it recognizes that municipalities are essential partners in solving our greatest national challenges, including housing affordability. And we know that tackling our housing crisis means getting all orders of government working together better and faster. The federal government federal budget, I should say, makes major investments to tackle common goals from growing housing supply to important steps to end chronic homelessness. Municipalities who best understand local supply needs welcome the Housing Accelerator Fund. It has transformative potential to help get housing built faster through direct and flexible investments if we work together to design it with speed and results in mind. The fund can help communities regardless of size, from cities to fast-growing rural towns. The potential is there for sure. We were also glad to see the budget commit to improving the Rental Construction Financing Initiative and the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. These changes could mean more affordable rental supply for more Canadians, and that's a direct call from local leaders and from FCM, and really is a critical component to expanding housing supply options for all. Municipalities have significant ambitions to tackle the housing crisis, and these investments, especially the Accelerator Fund, give municipalities the ability to take action and grow the right kind of affordable housing supply for Canadians. The budget scales up the Rapid Housing Initiative and extends the Reaching Home program. Both are critical to support the shared goal to end chronic homelessness in Canada. The Rapid Housing Initiative has been a genuine success story. It's working, and FCM will continue to advocate for growing the Rapid Housing Initiative into a long-term tool to eradicate homelessness. One critical outstanding need is for a robust urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. We look forward to discussing that further. Permettez-moi maintenant d'aborder un deuxième enjeu important pour la population, c'est la...
Let me now turn to a second issue, climate change. With the support of the federal government, and municipalities are prepared to take action against climate change.
Are on the front lines of new climate extremes, and the new investments in this budget, from electrical vehicle charging infrastructure to building retrofits to nature-based solutions, these provide municipalities with the tools they need to take local action on climate change. We welcomed the federal government's recognition in the emissions reductions plan that municipalities are critical to achieving Canada's 2030 emission goals, and we look forward to working with Parliament on the implementation of that critical plan to ensure that municipalities have the direct funding tools they need. That brings me to a third area for the budget, which is strong communities of all sizes. And we know that Canada's recovery needs to take root in our rural communities, which represent 1/3 of the economy. In particular, we welcome new investments in natural climate solutions and wildfire prevention, and also the commitment to ensure that growing rural and smaller communities can access the Housing Accelerator Fund. But when we look to the scale of need for rural climate adaptation and disaster mitigation, it's clear that there's more to do through the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. The need for this is urgent, as we saw last year in BC, in Atlantic Canada, as we're seeing right now with flooding in Manitoba and the Northwest Territories. Finally, many communities across the country are grappling with retroactive contract policing costs resulting from the new federally negotiated RCMP labor agreement, and rural communities will be particularly hard hit. This requires urgent federal attention and collaboration with FCM and affected municipalities. Our relationship between the federal and municipal governments is essential for the recovery Canadians deserve. Like never before, the past 2 years exposed our most pressing national challenges. They taught us that when we work together across orders of government, we can face these challenges in a way that supports the economy, builds strong communities, and ensures Canadians' quality of life. Local governments are ready to continue this vital work with Parliament, and the budget will help us moving in the right direction. That certainly includes the $750 million in emergency operating funding for transit that is included in Bill C-19. Thank you, merci. Je suis heureux de répondre à vos questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rubenstein, and all our witnesses for your opening remarks. We are now moving to our rounds of questions. In our first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask witnesses questions. We'll commence with the Conservative Party and have MP Chambers up first for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Wonderful to see everybody. We have quite a rich panel. Thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with us. I know we have Mr. Robson only until 4:30, so I will direct my initial questions to Mr. Robson and the CD Howe. Mr. Robson, when the budget came out, there was a number of articles suggesting that it was potentially a prudent budget. In fact, the government was referring to it as a prudent fiscal budget. I did some quick math, and looks like projected spending this year coming up versus pre-pandemic levels, spending is going to be up about 25% versus the year just before COVID. What was your immediate reaction to the budget?
Thank you for the question. Like you, I suppose, Mr. Chambers, I am struck by the degree to which baseline spending, if we can refer to it that way, has been escalating with every budget and fiscal update. such that when the COVID-related measures recede, we are looking at a federal government that is considerably larger than it used to be. I understand that there are a lot of unmet needs. The federal government is particularly well placed to satisfy. But the increase in operating costs alone is quite startling. The federal government has a big wage bill. It has a big pension liability, which inflation is going to make worse. And so what I was hoping to see and didn't see in Budget 22 was a fiscal track that really gave us the room to rebuild the federal government's fiscal capacity for the next thing that comes along. We have a bit of a practice, it seems, of treating everything that we encounter. The financial crisis of 2008-09, COVID just now, maybe the war, Russia attacking Ukraine is in this category, as though they're all once in a century events. I think a prudent fiscal track would restore fiscal capacity quickly in order that we'll be ready for whatever comes along next. And already in the presentations today, we've heard, for example, adaptation to climate change. That's very expensive. The federal government talks a lot about it, but I don't see the provision for that, and that will surely be very expensive.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the times and the events that have happened, say, over the last decade. At the beginning of COVID, there was a number of articles talked about how most governments have found kind of Keynesian economics, and everybody is a Keynesian now. Would you say that the budget or that this government's fiscal plan reflects that methodology?
The initial response to the pandemic seems to have been reasonably well calibrated to the crisis. In retrospect, we might have overdone it a little in those early months, but everybody remembers clearly how frightening it was and what it was like to be confronting the virus for the first time, not knowing how contagious it was, how lethal it would be, and so on. What is susceptible of some criticism is the degree to which both the fiscal and the monetary stimulus continued at the scale that it was. And the evidence for that is that we have very high inflation. We have it in Canada. It's also evident in the United States, the UK, Europe, many other places. So a lot of jurisdictions made the same mistake. It's done now. My comment now will be very much along the lines of what I said earlier. It's time to restore our fiscal capacity. The worst of COVID appears to be behind us, and we've got to bring the economy's productive capacity up and restrain spending to bring them into line. So I think that the initial response was perhaps a little too big, but I think we can give people a pass on that. The difficulty is that it's gone on too long.
Thank you very much for that. I remember before we had the budget, you were in front of the committee, and one of your recommendations was to look at that top line spending number, versus the deficit or the debt number. Obviously, as government spending does lead to, as you warned, and some other economists have warned, does lead to inflation. So it's important to look at that top line. But I would love to, just in my remaining minute, get your comments on the process. You mentioned about the large omnibus budget bills, maybe making them smaller. Do you have a second preference such that we're in this kind of era that it looks like these omnibus budget bills are here to stay, two successive administrations using them? Do you think we need kind of set budget dates and then a longer period of time to be working through some of these bills? Would that be kind of a second order or a fallback position for you? Or do you really think we need to try to get back to, tens of pages of budgets versus hundreds?
I think a shorter budget does make sense. If you look at the provincial budgets, you'll see documents that are much closer to what I described, where they're business-like documents. The key numbers are up front. There's not a lot of commentary. An uncharitable person would say political spin. And an MP somebody who's not a financial expert can readily find the key numbers and make sense of them. Federal budgets are uniquely bad. This goes back a number of years. It's not a partisan comment. We now, though, have this situation where the actual summary statement of transactions, which is the key fiscal statement in the budget, is not even in the main document. It's in an annex. So I think that simply reorganizing budgets and committing to putting the fiscal information front and center would be a good start. Omnibus bills, they're frequently decried. And we have seen election platform commitments not to do them. I think I think those impulses are well founded. It's tempting to resort to them once in power, but there are too many examples of legislation passed in haste where elected representatives simply did not have the bandwidth to examine them properly. And I think there's no reason why individual pieces of legislation that deal with different things could not be sliced up. Bill C-19, it's not uniquely bad in this regard, but if you look at the range of topics that are covered in it, there's no way even as committed and able a committee as this one can really be expert on everything that is in front of you.
Thank you, Mr. Robson. Thank you, MP Chambers. We are moving to the Liberals for questions, and we have MP Baker up for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and to all our witnesses for being here today. And Chair and colleagues, I'm having some internet connectivity issues, so please let me know if it gets patchy. I'd like to start my questions with the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada. And we've just been talking in a different context about spending in the budget, but one of the areas where there was a great increase in spending, and one that I strongly agree is necessary, is in defense. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the importance of the new investments in the budget in defense, and what impact you think they'll have on our national security, but also on your industry.
Oh, excellent. Thanks for the question, MP Baker. And I must say, we really appreciate the support you've given us. Specifically, we had companies trying to respond to the need in the Ukraine, and I know you were instrumental in helping connect some dots for us. It was all hands on deck, and still continues to be. So I want to thank you for that, and then also thank you for the support for our industry. You're right. We have seen significant increase in the funds in the budget. In the last budget with respect to defense, NATO, and NORAD modernization, which we were supportive of. There doesn't seem to be a lot of information coming from the government as to where that funding is going to go. So we're eager to work together with the government on that. And then, as I said in my opening remarks, Budget 2021 also included some funding for the aerospace sector with the direct rationale because the industry had been hit harder. And that's why I was trying to draw that distinction between the investments, which are good, which are needed, which will benefit the industry, but then having a tax of up to 20% on the same industry on what has been a bright spot with respect to business aviation. We have a lot of concerns in this particular piece of legislation.
Okay, I appreciate that. And thank you for the kind words. And I'm going to return the favor and thank you and your members for all that you have done and are doing, and support the people of Ukraine in this important fight. And it's not just a fight for them, it's a fight for all of us. So I think you used the expression, it's all hands on deck. And I think that means all hands on deck here in government, but I think it's all hands on deck internationally as well. So thank you for being part of that fight. I'll continue, if I may, with you, Mike, and what I just want to hear your thoughts on is, what types of investments, you talked about sort of the specifics aren't there yet on the spending. So let's talk about those specifics. Like what specifically would you like to see? What kind of investments should the government be making and specifically to drive growth in the aerospace sector?
So that's a great question, MP Baker. Thanks for it. With respect to investment, we're definitely looking at innovation across the board. There's phenomenal increases that we've seen with our industry with respect to green aviation, so that's a big focus. With respect to the defense particularly, there's huge opportunities with respect to NORAD modernization and again with our NATO contributions. And one of the things that we've really been talking to the government about and Minister Tassi about is, as part of those investments, one, we want to see where the government would want to go with that. There's huge opportunities, surveillance, autonomous. There's a whole host of things that Canada can be a world leader in. But how do we leverage those procurements to make sure that we're building the industry here in Canada and that we are contributing to innovation for the next 20, 30 years down the line, that we can be successful as an industry. The other thing I will say is we're concerned about the timeliness of a lot of these projects, the concerns about the government being able to spend that money in a timely manner. So that's something we're really looking towards. And we're also looking towards this defense policy review that's coming. We haven't heard anything about that. We'd like to be involved. We'd like to contribute to that. And it's part of our overall message to the government and parliamentarians on the need for a national aerospace strategy, which takes into account the defense spending, and then I think would also solve some of the problems we're seeing on this luxury tax piece if we had a significant roadmap and strategic strategy for the sector as a whole.
I appreciate that. I think I only have about 25 seconds left, so I won't ask another question, but I might just thank you and your members again for all that you're doing for the people of Ukraine and for the people of Canada, and thanks very much for your input today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, MP Baker. Now we'll move to the block. And Monsieur Samari for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to say hello to all of the witnesses. Thank you for coming here and the presentation. I have questions for Mr. Mueller and Mr. Chartrand from the aerospace sector. In C19, we have a select luxury item tax act, and there have been problems with this. It seems that the tax has been poorly designed. It's rare that we see both employers and employees complaining that there is a problem that'll have an impact on the manufacturing sector, and that we have to not weaken this sector. We're talking about jobs and expertise. My question is for Mr. Mueller and Mr. Chartrand. Your both presentations were very convincing. I hope that we will take rapid action. So my question to both of you is, Mr. Mueller, in your presentation, you said this tax poses a problem if the government wants to maintain it. It's going to have to exempt the aerospace sector. If they continue doing this, we've sent some recommendations to better support the industry. What are these recommendations? And perhaps Mr. Chartrand could comment on your comments. Thank you very much for your question.
I really appreciate your support for the industry and interest in it. We're going to provide a written submission to the committee, but maybe just high level some of the concerns that we've seen with the bill as is. And again, our first point would be, let's remove aircraft from it. There's a reputational issue at stake here, and we've talked about the good paying jobs, and I couldn't help but notice, I took a note here, Mr. Tobin's comment on the quality jobs, which is exactly what we have in the aerospace sector. I believe 30% higher wages overall. So it's really something we want to protect. But just quickly, high-level concerns. We have concerns about the rebate provisions of the legislation surrounding the tax and the exports. It'll have dramatic impacts on cash flow. The thresholds currently in place in the bill to determine what is business use. 90% is extremely high. We're suggesting something more practical. The onerous and burdensome reporting mechanisms on industry. So a daily analysis of flights to determine that threshold, which I previously talked about. There's also the provision of liability on the manufacturer in case of a false statement. And there's a potential that the manufacturer could pay down the line if the plane's use changes over time. So huge liability over the long term, which we're very concerned about. And it just, daily reporting, that kind of liability is just not common sense in my mind. Also, the threshold, the financial threshold, we have $100,000 for luxury cars. It's the same for planes. That doesn't make any sense, especially when boats are $250,000. So a reevaluation of that. And lastly, the exemption of charter operations. Again, we're seeing companies across the country that run charter operations domestically. This is going to impact their business models and impact jobs there also. So maybe I'll just leave it there and make sure that David has time to speak also.
Oui, merci, Monsieur Chartrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chartrand. Thank you, Gabrielle, for your questions.
Is that of course, we can't not agree with what Mike has said, what industry is saying. As a stakeholder in this, as the members who are working in this industry, I've said it in the opening statements. We've lost 30,000 jobs in the last 2 years. 30,000 jobs. Mike has stated it, and others have talked about the quality of these jobs. These are great manufacturing jobs that we have in this country. We pay a high level of taxes because of the average wage in this industry, which is money going back into government to pay for our social programs, to pay for all different programs and all that. So, like I said, if we have any suggestions that we want to make, we asked, that we recommended that there be a study that be undertaken about the impact of this tax on aerospace. It appears there's oversights in its design. Its potential implications for jobs in the industry, are dangerous. So we strongly recommend that the federal government take a closer look at the impacts of this tax. As part of the undertaking, we recommend that the government include an analysis of similar taxation frameworks in other countries. Like we've said, for lessons learned, namely those who were Canada, who are part of Canada's supply chain. We can look at those, or those we compete with, so that we can fully understand the impact on this industry and the employment. So, in essence, we completely agree with the industry and Mike and all the stakeholders that there needs to be more extensive work done on this. And before there was a discussion on omnibus bills. I fully agree that omnibus bills usually are used to try to rush through something, not do something properly, not necessarily take a good look at the impacts that some of these things are going to do, to Canadians. So I strongly agree that omnibus bills are not necessarily what's in the best interest of our country, and I think that things should be looked at a little bit closer to ensure that we don't lose any more jobs than we already have.
Merci, MP Samari. And now to the NDP and MP Blakey for 6 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to start my round with Ms. Vipon and Mr. Roberts from the Canadian Labour Congress to talk a little bit about some of the reforms for the EI Appeal Board that are in C19. I know the CLC and others have expressed concern about the reform that's there. I wondered if you wanted to highlight some of the ways you believe C19 could be amended in order to address the concerns that are coming out of the labor community.
Thank you for the question. And yes, we fundamentally believe that it is so important for our EI system to be robust and there, especially for all workers, and especially during situations that we've had in the past where we kind of have these economic crises, and it needs to be there for workers to be able to rely on. And so we, like we mentioned, we're happy that there is an address to kind of move forward some of those elements in there, but I think we want to see that is representative, because it has to be about workers, employers, and the government. It is a tripartite, commission that needs to be there. So we want to make sure that those representatives are from the communities that they have a better knowledge of the work and the better knowledge of the experience. And so we'll be able to deal with those appeals that come when we talk about the appeals. We also think that workers have a right to the appeals to happen in their communities, and they have to be able to be there in person, because it is a huge barrier if they're not allowed to participate, and they have to be here in Ottawa because they're not being in person, because it is if you're in the EI system and you're working with an appeal, that is not an easy road. And so we should be doing whatever we can for workers and to be there. And so the recommendations that came out of 2018, we think that could be included in this. And we're also worried about the amount of time it's going to take. 2018 is a fair long time ago. And so these changes should be implemented relatively swiftly. But let me pass it to my colleague, Chris.
Thanks. Well, just to add to the violent agreement about the shortcomings of omnibus bills, this is another example of where removing Division 32 from Bill C-19 for separate study, I think, would be a service to parliamentarians and to all stakeholders of the EI system that want to see this fundamental institutional reform happen prudently and with the right amount of accountability so that we don't repeat the experience of the Social Security Tribunal.
Thank you very much. I wanted then to ask Mr. Chartrand just on the question of the luxury tax. I think part of what I'm hearing is that there is a design problem in terms of the way that manufacturers are targeted in the design of the tax. I'm wondering if you do have some suggestions for how a luxury tax might be structured in the aerospace industry that would put less of a burden on manufacturers while still honoring the principle behind the luxury tax.
Well, there's already existing, existing provisions in the legislation where we can tax people. We can tax, on the usage of aircraft like that. One of the things that we could do also is we could take a look at used business aircraft. I mean, right now we're taxing the manufacturer in the way that we're doing things, and we're impeding, the production of new aircraft and all that, where most of the jobs are. When you're looking at the resale of used aircraft, it's not usually that's where somebody who's rich, who has a lot of money, who's using it for personal use, will go and purchase an aircraft. So, there's nothing being done on that side. When you're looking through the pandemic and pre-pandemic, in the used business aircraft segment, the percentage of sales went up. Contrary to in the new manufacturing side, sales went down 20%. So what we would be doing if we're not looking at the used market instead of the brand new market. I mean, we're hurting the industry where all the workers are and all the jobs are. That's one of the things that we can do. We can use existing. We could lower the level also. The level is very high of taxation. The obligation at 90% is extremely high. So that's another thing that we can look at lowering the percentage. Of course, we'd rather that business aircraft are removed. If that's impossible, then there's other things that we can look at. Always. Of course, we're looking with the intent of saving as many jobs as possible, because we're talking about 1,000 jobs. Those are direct jobs. You've also got all the indirect jobs that you're talking about. So it's a huge impact to the communities.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Is there anything that you would care to add on that topic?
I would just say thank you again for the question. And part of it is the manufacturing, but the one part also that's there is the maintenance, the repair, the overall on those used planes also. So there's a segment of the supply chain that would be impacted regardless. But David is right. There is a personal use benefit taxation already in place that is there. But when you place the tax on manufacturing and then indirectly on the maintenance, repair, and overhaul, we're hearing from companies that it may be easier just to operate these planes out of the U.S. And well, if you do that, the modifications happen there, the repair happens there, and it's just an absolute devastation to the industry and the workers. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, considering the impacts that this will have on the industry. 1,000 jobs, $1 billion in revenue lost. And then once you start taking into account the modification, the repairs that go along with it, and the maintenance, it's quite significant. So my concern is the impacts of this piece of legislation isn't doing what the government would like them to do.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Blakey. Members, witnesses, we're moving into our second round. In this round, the Conservatives are up first, and we have MP Stewart for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first questions are to C.D. Howe Institute. In your presentation earlier when we came in here this afternoon, I heard the following comment, basically that what did you mean by part of Bill C-19 being unconstitutional? I did hear that, and that really intrigued me, and I wondered if you could explain what you meant by that comment, and by all means go into detail so we can really understand what was being projected there.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for the question. The change is proposing to be a result in corporations now facing what are called administrative monetary penalties, and they're called AMPs, of up to 3% of annual worldwide gross revenues. So let me talk a little bit about legal process first. If an AMP is penal in nature, and rather than just a deterrent, then it's effectively a criminal penalty, and the alleged offender must be tried in accordance with due process requirements of Section 11 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Neither the misleading advertising nor the abuse of dominance provisions that attract these new significant penalties are criminal offenses, and the burden of proof to be convicted in these areas is a lower balance of probabilities standard of proof. Now, the increase to the fines to be set on the global revenues of a firm, and the penalties could easily be in the billions of dollars, that, and this is the critical part, are not directly related to the harms of the practice, greatly raise the likelihood that the fines could be found as penal and therefore unconstitutional. Now, with these large potential penalties, not only is there a risk of unconstitutionality, there's a risk of over-deterrence, and firms may shy away from some of the practices that are going to be beneficial for Canadians. These potential fines raise reputational risks for Canada as well, of not being supportive of foreign direct investment.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate you going into greater detail on that as well. With Canada's deficit at a staggering $148 billion this year, would you agree that this government is not taking the urgent steps needed to protect Canadians from personal and corporate tax increases and service cuts in the near future?
Yeah, well, the way I would add that we have to think about this through the lens of provinces as well, where if you look at the overall state of Canada's fiscal outlook, we're looking at very large healthcare expenses in the future, an echo boom of education payments, and how we're paying for students in schools. So there are some very large looming costs, not to mention things that we've already mentioned in terms of liabilities for dealing with emissions reductions and the consequences of climate change. We've had a lot of fiscal pressures coming our way, and no clear plan of how to pay for it. So yes, there are some concerns that in the future we're going to face some pretty large increases either at the federal level or at the provincial level. And there's one taxpayer, and if the federal government is spending that fiscal room, provinces are going to be in real trouble.
Thank you for the answer. For my last question, taking into consideration the current government's costly new programs that have no revenue to cover them and what looks like a stagnating economy, we will most certainly see the next generation of Canadians saddled with a massive debt to deal with. What does C.D. Howe have to say with respect to the top three failures in the planning surrounding this current budget?
I would start from your first point, which is programs that don't have a commensurate revenue with a plan to pay for it. Programs, new government spending does not pay for itself. Taxpayers must pay for the programs that we want, whether it's pharmacare, whether it's dental care, or childcare. We have to have revenues, new revenues that accompany new programs. So if those are the three three major new programs that we're looking at, I'd ask, what is the revenue that we're going to be accompanying? The government is going to say, we're going to give you this new spending, but we were going to ask you to pay for it with this. That's what I would be asking the government to explain more.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Stewart. And now we'll hear from the Liberals. MP Zerowitz for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I want to say huge thanks to all our presenters today. We really have an outstanding group of presenters with some very important information. My initial questions are going to be directed to Mr. Stephen Tobin. Mr. Tobin, you have addressed an issue that is literally on the minds of all of us and comes up in the House of Commons almost every single day, which is how is it that we address our skills and labor shortage issue? And thanks for letting us know or reminding us that those are two very different things. I hear you very clearly when you talk about your 3-point plan, the comprehensive labor strategy, diagnosing the labor issue first, and then the cohesive and integrated skill strategy. The first thing I would like to ask you to do, and this is something I'm hoping you'll be able to submit, in terms of where we start with the comprehensive labor strategy, you had indicated that it's important to meet with a series of stakeholders. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind submitting in short order to this committee who the list of stakeholders you would propose that we have. So if you could do that, I'd be very grateful. And then I'm going to move to my next question. I'll have you respond to that first one in a minute as well at the same time. But on your second part, where you diagnose the problem, the labor problem across the country, you talked about streamlining open access or providing open access to existing sources of information and EI. Could you elaborate a little bit more on those existing sources of information and a little bit more what you mean by EI? And then is there any other data that you think we should be collecting that we haven't started collecting yet? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So, I mean, the quick answer to your first question is yes, I would be happy to give some consideration as to the stakeholders that should be consulted as part of the development of a comprehensive labor market strategy. So, yes, with pleasure. On the second point with respect to data, look, traditionally as a researcher, I would always say that more data is always better, of course, but when I think about policy, there needs to be some consideration as to the costs and benefits of acquiring new data. And so this is why, in the first instance, my proposal on the labor and skill shortages is to leverage and harness data that's already there so we can better diagnose the problem. And so when I think about that issue, I think about two sources of information. One is about the source of information with respect to people. So we have great information on unemployed people across this country, very detailed, very granular, by those who are receiving employment insurance. It exists. Of course, it's individual level data, so it takes some time to process. So we need to be careful with respect to privacy and data quality, but allowing a more streamlined, open access while protecting that privacy to that data will give us great and detailed insights as to the availability of labor pool across this country. Right now, there is some availability to that data, but it comes with such a significant delay, very difficult to access, but it is there. And I think we should start by leveraging access to that information. At the same time, we also have very good information on the demand for labor through vacancy surveys. This coming through Statistics Canada. Again, wealth of information available on the types of jobs that employers are asking for. And so by allowing us greater and more open access to that information, it will give us some insights as to the types of jobs that employers are looking for. And so I would start by harnessing and leveraging those two existing data sets. Now, if asked and pushed, okay, what more data do we need? I would again start by seeing what that information would tell us first. But I think right now, to my point about the difference between skills and credentials, right now we continue to sort of lack good information on the types of skills that employers are looking for, which sort of puts us in a difficult place as to how we can develop and design training programs that will give individuals those skills. And so even the way we collect information today is very much about, I would say it's termed skill level, but in essence, we're talking about qualifications and credentials. So I think this is the one area where I think we need to be considering where and in what manner we should be collecting better information on skills.
Thank you.
Thank you,
MP Zarowitz. And that's the time. We are moving to the block, and MP Sainte-Marie for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, encore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for both Mr. Mueller and Chartrand. Mr. Chartrand, isn't it unfortunate that the government has not done an economic impact study on this poorly designed luxury items, which will hit the aerospace sector hard? But in your opinion, the impact of this will, how does it create uncertainty for the industry? And is it going to tarnish our international reputation? I'd like both of you to answer, if possible. Yes, it's going to tarnish our reputation. Those who give the orders, do I speak in French or English? It's as you wish. When people who want to order come to Canada, looking at the aircraft manufacturing sector, there are three things that they take a look at. First of all, availability of manpower, the supply chain, and another thing that they look at is government support. Obviously, this is a three-part template. And if you take, it's like a stool with three legs, and if you remove one of those legs, you know what happens. When they look at the government supports that will help them, they're going to look at also during a crisis or during a problem, what does the government do to attract businesses to come here to Canada? How does government support industry by providing support for training? So adding a tax that creates more obstacles, that doesn't help the industry whatsoever. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mueller.
Merci pour la question.
I thank you for your question.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you'd mentioned the economic impact assessment. We were very concerned with the understanding that that hadn't been done, just by, again, the results that we've seen by going out and surveying our members, 1,000 jobs and the $1 billion lost in revenue. But the uncertainty that this brings, and we've talked a lot about the international reputation piece, and I'll just give a little example which has come up in consultations on potential free trade agreements. There's a lot of discussions about how do you lower tariffs to make sure that we can sell our aircraft internationally, and we have a whole Department of International Trade focused on that specifically. And then isn't it contradictory that we have another government department in Finance Canada putting a 20% tax on that same plane if it's bought domestically? So there's absolutely an international reputational damage being done here. We've talked a lot in the past and still do about the need for a national aerospace strategy. And again, it goes to that support from the government for this, what is a strategic sector. All of our competitor nations have aerospace strategies. We do not. All of our competitor nations do not have a tax of this nature, and we're contemplating putting one in place. It makes no sense. We do need that predictability. We do need that certainty. The legislation is
Thank
flawed.
you, Mr. Mueller. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you.
Merci, MP Saint-Marie. And now for 2.5 minutes, MP Blakey, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rubenstein, I wanted to ask, C-19 incorporates another government bill, C-17, which has, among other things, some money for housing and transit. I understand the need for ongoing operating support for public transit, and certainly understand the need for public investment in housing. Still trying to get a little bit of a better sense of how the government intends to mix those two in this funding pot. And I'm wondering if you're aware of any work or consultation that's gone on to better define for provinces and municipalities how those two important policy areas are meant to interact within this funding envelope.
Sure, thanks. Thanks very much. Appreciate the question. And you're right, this subsumes a piece that was in Bill C-17, a really critical piece of funding for our members and transit systems who continue to face shortfalls due to the pandemic. It's taking much longer than I think we all hope to get back to the ridership levels that we had ahead of the pandemic. And this question of integrating transit and housing, I mean, we're seeing it across different types of interventions and programs. It's really critical that we do that right, that we think about how to develop our city's transit-oriented development as a strategy, for example, linking housing and transit. As it relates to this funding, the core intention here is to support transit systems and municipalities with those pandemic shortfalls. And the way I read the intention from finance is to make sure that as this funding is delivered, that provinces and territories are working with their municipalities to talk about housing supply and talk about we have an integrated vision to tackle that challenge. We welcome that. And as I said, it's work that we're doing with Infrastructure Canada on programs, with CMHC for sure, across both transit and housing in an integrated fashion. Look forward to that work continuing.
It seems to me that with $750 million, by the time you address the transit operating shortfalls, there's probably not a lot left for housing. So is your understanding that that's meant to be more of a kind of notional planning type of direction inside that funding envelope? It's not actually meant to build any housing, but it's meant to try and incorporate housing into transit design?
Certainly the way that we approached this question earlier in the year, ahead of the budget, and when this was first announced earlier in the spring, was to talk about these transit pandemic shortfalls, these operating shortfalls. So that is the need for sure. And I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have a suite of measures in the budget that tackle housing supply. They're all connected to each other, right? And that's the Accelerator Fund, it's changes to the National Housing Strategy, really welcome. It's the Rapid Housing Initiative. We need all of that. The challenge is huge. And unfortunately, on the transit shortfalls, our members are really constrained. We don't have the fiscal tools and fiscal flexibility of higher orders of government to tackle some of those shortfalls. So this support's critical, as is support from the provinces to tackle those shortfalls.
Thank you to the two Daniels. And now we'll move to the Conservatives, and we have, welcome back, MP McLean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's good to see everybody here again, and it's a committee I miss. So I am going to get right into the questioning here. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody in person. Welcome everybody on screen. I have the honor today of asking questions of the Business Council of Alberta, Mr. Michael Holden. Mr. Holden, I heard your comments. Thank you for what I think are very informative and future-thinking alternatives on where we have to move going forward here. You talked in your comments about the investment tax credit for CCUS. Would it surprise you if I told you that we're dealing with Bill C-19, the Budget Implementation Act, and there actually is no provision in this act for the investment tax credit?
Thank you for the question. I confess that I was not aware of that. In the time that we had to prepare our comments, we focused on the issues that we were paying most attention to in the budget itself, rather than what was contained in Bill C-19 specifically.
It surprised me too, I should confess, when I first had to look at the bill, because it does seem like there is a climate emergency out there, and the government keeps shouting that at the walls, and yet they haven't moved forward on a carbon tax credit in over a year since I first put it on the docket as a bill in Parliament, and now it's in the budget after more than a year of consultation, and it's not in the Budget Implementation Act, so we're still waiting. I know industry is still waiting to see what that looks like before they commit to actually moving forward with many projects. And you're in Alberta, you know how many projects are sitting there waiting for what happens here as we go forward. Would it also surprise you that Canada Growth Fund that you referred to is not part of the Budget Implementation Act?
My understanding with those, thank you for the question, was that each of those cases required additional consultation with industry in order to help shape the design of those programs. So to answer your question, I did not know that it was not in there, but it does not overly surprise me for the simple reason that these were programs that needed to be, the consultations with industry needed to happen before that design was before a specific program would be implemented.
Thank you. How do you foresee the Canada Growth Fund being different from the unspent money in the Canada Infrastructure Bank?
That's a question that I would have to get back to you on, that I don't specifically have an answer to. I think that from our perspective, what we were looking for in this budget was, being from Alberta, we're the source of, we're largest source of Canada's emissions, a large contributor to the economy because of our energy sector, that we needed to see action from the federal government in order to help leverage the private sector investment that was needed to actually meet these emissions targets that the federal government has set. And so putting this kind of action on the table, I think, is an important step in the right direction. It may not be the only step that is needed, but we do need the investment tax credit. We do need all hands on deck, and most importantly, we need governments and industry working together, and that's the only way we're going to address these issues.
Thank you. One of the other witnesses talked about the waiting a year before we actually implement some of the approvals we're talking about here, and you mentioned the massive approval process of getting regulations through and getting projects built, which is exactly the hurdles that businesses in Alberta, I think across the country, are facing, as the regulatory process is onerous and effectively has a lack of foresight on how it actually, what the outcome will be. Have you had any consultation with the government about reforming this process, much as Germany has done in the face of the onslaught from Russia into Ukraine? They have lessened their regulatory process by 90% to get gasification facilities built in Germany. Is that something you'd like to see similarly in Canada?
Thank you. I do believe that we need to work as quickly as possible on this, and the regulatory reforms and speeding up these approval processes are critical to meeting the ERP targets, which are only 7.5 years away. To answer your question, we have spoken to Ministers Guilbeault and Wilkinson, as well as members of the PCO at the bureaucratic level in the Prime Minister's office about this. So we have expressed those concerns, and we feel like we have been heard. It's a question of whether or not the government will be able to deploy its resources towards addressing the reforms of these systems in the same way that climate change itself is being viewed as an emergency, because it would be very difficult for Canada to meet its 2030 targets, which are 7.5 years away, if it takes 5 to 6 years to approve a project to even start putting a dent in it.
Right, and thank you for speaking up so loudly for the benefits that LNG from Canada would provide to the world's environmental footprint. I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn to everyone.
That's the time,
That's
MP
the
McLean.
time.
Yeah, it goes fast. And we do thank our witnesses. We know that we asked you to appear with very short order, and we do thank you for that. We have the Liberals up next, and MP McDonald for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go back to Mr. Holden and kind of tag on to the low carbon economy and reference to possibly Alberta too. And I'm glad to hear you say that you do recognize the fact that there will be consultations relevant to the Canada Growth Fund. But are we doing enough to help carbon-intensive industries and other stakeholders with investments like the Carbon Growth Fund? Like, are we on the appropriate trajectory in your mind or your organization's mind?
Thank you for the question. I think this is a challenge that we're in danger of underestimating the amount of investment that is required. I believe there's a line in Budget 2022 which states that the level of investment needed is around, in order to achieve Canada's climate targets, is in the range of $125 to $140 billion a year. And that's both public and private, and that current investments are about 1/10 that level. So I think that some of the initiatives that are in this budget represent a step in the right direction, but they're a fraction of what is needed. And I think that we need to have a frank conversation and an honest discussion of the costs and the trade-offs and have put everything on the table to make sure that we understand, as I said, the magnitude of the challenge and what is actually needed to be able to get there.
It's interesting. You read sometimes about even shareholders stepping out of oil companies now if they're not moving quick enough. So it's going to be a very interesting time for the oil and gas industry. But you see companies rebranding and they talk about lowering their emissions. Are the companies moving fast enough? We know that there was $174 billion surplus or revenue last year on the oil and gas sector. So are they actually moving quick enough in your mind, being from Alberta, or is there a lot of smoke and mirrors?
I can say that there is, we speak to these companies on a fairly regular basis, and there is a deep commitment, especially among the oil sands operators, to achieve net zero by 2050 and to work with the federal government on that path. We're seeing a number of significant investments in the province, many of which are related to hydrogen development and clean hydrogen in particular, and the possibility of investments in carbon capture once that tax credit is put in place. So the companies are doing a lot. They've done a lot to reduce their emissions intensity, which is not the same as absolute emissions reductions, I fully admit. But I think that if we look internationally, countries that have been successful at reducing emissions from heavy industry and from the energy sectors that they have, the most successful ones have done it when industry and governments are working together. And so in our case, it's the federal, provincial, and governments as well as industry that all need to be involved at the table and consulting with one another and rowing the boat in the same direction.
Yes, that's extremely important. It leads me into my next question because at one point in time in a previous life, I was part of the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and I can tell you from going from province to province to province, the cooperation and impediments of regulatory barriers it shouldn't happen, but it's there obviously because it becomes a political impediment to some extent. So I'll leave that. Thank you for those. And if I have a couple of minutes left, Chair, I want to move to Mr. Dacus, if I could, just quickly. I know we talk about deficits, and I wanted to clarify on the number of year-end deficit March 31st was 113 billion. I'm not sure if it was correctly mentioned or previous, but further to that, I just want to quote Stephen Polez here, and he says, of the fiscal room that was on the table, only about half of it was deployed in new programs. The rest was geared towards reducing the debt to GDP ratio through time a little faster than it otherwise would, which I think is a bit of success given the political situation we find ourselves in. And I know when we look at budgets, we always tend to look at expenditures very quickly and make assumptions, but we never tend to look at the revenues. And we've seen growth here in the last 8 months through the Omicron. So I'm just wondering, Mr. Dacus, is that a fair assessment that Mr. Polaz gave us as a government?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I think about is I go back to the words of Don Drummond, who's one of our fellows at the CD Institute, former official in the government, where the common reaction to the 2022 federal budget is not as bad as expected. But what kind of evaluation is that? We have the fear stoked by the government's own statements leading into it, and you get credit for setting a low bar than hopping over it. So when it comes to the fiscal situation, we're coming from a very bad situation where the deficits that we were having as our baseline were eye-popping, and they're still quite large. We have to deal with these deficits now, but not just at the federal level, but recognize where the provincial level is going. We've got provincial budgets, for example, in Ontario, that have assumptions. This is a nonpartisan comment given government there. You've got a government there with assumptions on health expenditures that are fanciful. We've got long-term health expenses at the provinces that are going to eat Canadian taxpayers alive. So we have to be thinking about this at both levels of government.
Thank you, MP MacDonald. And now we're moving members into our third round. And welcome to our committee, MP Moise. And the floor is yours for 5 minutes of questions.
Great, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here today. And my first question actually is to Mr. Mueller and Mr. Chartrand. You talked a bit about the job and competitiveness impacts of this proposed tax. And you touched, I think, briefly on in your introductory remarks about the supply chain impacts. And I want to give you an opportunity to speak a bit more about that, just because normally I'm on the Transport Committee. We've spent a bit of time talking about supply chains, and it's having a huge, we're having a huge impact on our economy right now, given a lot of supply chain challenges. So maybe you can talk a bit more about how this is going to impact downstream the supply chain.
Evidently, it's going to impact the supply chain. This tax is clearly going to affect direct manufacturers, but also businesses in the supply chains. In Ontario alone, two of the largest companies in the aerospace supply chain, Safran Landing Systems and Aerotech, are also going to be impacted by regulatory changes. In Eastern Canada, Stelia Aerospace, the Airbus Group, Avcorp Industries, Field Aviation in the West, smaller SMEs who rely on OMEs for continuity of contracts and business. So any disruption is going to have a ripple effect impacting jobs across the country. It's clear that the passing of this proposed tax in its current form is only going to place an obstacle to recovery in the subsector of manufacturing of parts. So there will definitely be an impact also. How to quantify it, that's why we're asking for a study of the impact on jobs. That's why we're saying that we should go more in depth in this. So there's definitely going to be an impact on OEMs and on the supply chain.
Yeah, maybe if I could just chime in also on that. Absolutely right, what David had said. This is in every region of the country that we're going to see the impacts. You often think of the larger OEMs, but you have engine makers that put their engines on those planes. You have the landing systems that David talked about. You got the repair. You got the small SMEs that are part of that supply chain, and then you have rural British Columbia, you have Ontario, you have Quebec, obviously. Some people wouldn't think of Prince Edward Island, but Prince Edward Island has a burgeoning aerospace sector there also. So this is going to impact right across the country, right across the supply chain. And again, these are good paying jobs, and there's a real opportunity here for this sector to contribute to the economic recovery of the country coming out of COVID-19. And it's just this tax needs to be rethought, relooked at, because it's going to do some real damage to the supply chain. It's going to do damage to jobs. It's going to do damage to revenue, and it's going to do damage reputationally internationally. So a lot of concerns.
Thank you for that. So I know the other witness from the CD Howe has departed, but if I could ask, because I know there's a shadow budget that's prepared, and I'm wondering if any consideration is given to measuring results and whether we're getting a good value for money spent, because in this budget we saw $50 billion more in uncontrolled spending. That's going to have impact on our competitiveness as an economy. It's driving up inflation, as has been noted. So, is there enough in the budget to measure, or what consideration should be given to measuring value for dollar?
This is a perennial problem in any kind of government service, where you're asking yourself, well, what did this bureaucrat do in terms of taking work from, taking an idea and turning it into output? But it's true of everyone. How do you measure this in the health sector, for example? It's very difficult to measure outcomes in government services, rightly so in some cases. Where it would go in terms of value for money is in the budget process. For example, there are ways of asking yourself, when you have a clear fiscal anchor of a return to balanced budget in, say, a few years, rather than a much more high level question of an anchor that's based on debt to GDP, which depends on multiple factors, including the economy. When you have a balanced budget requirement in a few years, you have a very clear set of metrics that says this spending is not going to fit within our set criteria. So if we had that kind of outlook of, well, when we're trying to return to a balanced budget, it'll help government really focus its mind on what kind of spending makes the most sense.
Thank you, MP Moise. That's the time. And now we're moving to the Liberals. MP Chattel for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all the presenters for coming here this afternoon. I have a question for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I have a riding with 41 municipalities. I hear a lot of complaints that you've put forward in your brief. Earlier, you talked about rural issues. I'd like to invite you to elaborate on that. What are the issues that you have noted in terms of housing for small municipalities? My colleagues and I think about access to land. It's becoming more and more difficult. lot of it's difficult. Can you tell me how the programs that we now have in the budget can be adapted to the rural sector? Thank you for your question.
Applying a rigorous rural lens to how programs are designed and implemented for all the reasons that you mentioned. For sure, in the Housing Accelerator Fund, the budget talks about ensuring that smaller and fast-growing rural communities can access that. And I was at the FINA committee last week on the program and made the suggestion that it would be possible to have a carve-out for rural and smaller communities within that program. So you're not applying in the same bucket as larger communities. We've seen that work in other models. I mentioned the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund ahead of the budget, and in our pre-budget submissions we talked about the needs for water, wastewater infrastructure, particularly for smaller communities, on broadband as well. That, of course, has received a lot of attention, remains a real focus. But on housing, what I can share is we know the housing crisis is felt everywhere now, and our board, which represents large cities, medium-sized, rural, northern, everyone's seized with this. So on something like homelessness, the Reaching Home program, we've talked before about the need for a larger carve-out for rural communities within that program. Hope that's how that's implemented going forward, and appreciate all the efforts across departments to apply that kind of rural lens. It's something we work quite closely with Minister Hutchings, with Infrastructure Canada, with other departments across government to get right.
Mais en l'absence.
But in the absence of a carve-out for small municipalities in a rural setting, how can the programs be better adapted? For example, what we're hearing is that the main programs offered by the CMHC are very cumbersome for small organizations who are trying to roll out affordable housing. And then there's the Rapid Housing Initiative. It's a lot more accessible in rural areas. So could we take this initiative as being a good way to help small municipalities?
The Rapid Housing Initiative is being a best practice in how to deliver funding, and the biggest challenge with RHI is not having enough access to funding, so appreciate another round in the budget. As it relates to other NHS programs, I mentioned in my remarks the National Co-Investment Fund. This is the primary delivery mechanism for social and affordable housing, and we took great pains ahead of the budget to say, as you launch the Accelerator Fund, at the same time, let's speed up the approvals, let's increase the amount that's available for contributions, so higher grants, to make the economics work a bit better and move dollars faster within the co-investment fund and in the rental construction program. The budget signals that. That's really important work, and we want to see it happen fast and happen in a way that's sensitive to communities of all sizes. Appreciate the question.
Nous allons suivre ça, évidemment.
We're going to be following that. Thank you very much.
See, Madame Chatel, now we'll hear from the bloc, and MP Samari for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, donc encore une fois pour...
I have a question once again for Mr. Mueller and Chartrand. The Department of Finance, or the Minister of Finance has said, for the aircraft that's going to be exported, the tax will be, they're going to try and find something, but it's not urgent because it's only going to come into effect by January 1st of next year. So we'll have time to amend this. But in the short term, this 90% usage, it seems to me that there's no political will to amend anything whatsoever. What message would you like to give to the minister? I'm going to begin. The message that I sent is clear. This tax, we have a lot of questions about it. Right now, We've heard that there are some companies that have already got orders that have been canceled for business aircraft. And in addition to that, there's a number of orders that have been pending. And what about the potential? Well, they'll go elsewhere. This will have an impact on the supply chain, on jobs here in Canada. So that's all I want to say. Mr. Mueller, thank you for your question.
As I said before, the industry needs predictability and certainty. And while we were encouraged by the minister's comment, we haven't seen anything concrete. So we're really looking towards some concrete measures on this. As I said, the legislation is flawed. The economic impacts is quite severe. Especially for an industry that lost 30,000 jobs through the pandemic, to now put them through this just doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And you're absolutely right. There's the threshold piece, which I talked about, the 90%, the unfair burden on the manufacturers, absolutely. And then also the export tax piece, huge considerations on cash flow as things move back and forth. So a lot of concerns. We need to see some changes, but ultimately my recommendation would be to remove the aircraft piece from this. It's not doing what the government wants it to do.
Merci à vous deux.
Merci, MP Saint-Marie. And now to the NDP and MP Blakey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Tobin. I wanted to ask you, currently we have a lot of employers who are saying they can't find people to work. We've got a lot of people who say they want to work and they can't find the right job. Obviously, at the very least, there's a bit of a mismatch going on. And, I think we missed an opportunity when people were coming off pandemic benefits to try and train people into positions that were available. We continue to miss opportunities, I think, through the employment insurance system to try and connect individual workers who are looking for the right job with employers who have real positions available and training people into jobs. And then beyond that, there's questions of, public investment. If we're talking about climate change, whether it's in construction, manufacturing, or other sectors, developing a work forecast so that employers can train people with confidence and onboard them for the work that not just that they have right now, but that they'll be planning to do. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to, how government might try and have a policy approach that is more particular than just sort of, asking people to train for an industry in which they hope to find a job instead of trying to connect them directly with employers who could have a job waiting for them at the end of training.
Yeah, thank you. I think you put the sort of point of question is that on the one hand, many employers are saying we can't find people or we can't find people with the right skills, but then we know and understand that many Canadians are having difficulty finding a job. And yeah, I think this is happening for at least 3 or 4 different reasons. One is in some cases there really aren't any people that are available, right? In other cases, there's a mismatch of what I would say expectations, right? And so we saw a considerable change in expectations, notably in the hospitality and accommodation industry during the pandemic. And we also have a mismatch of skills. And so in some instances, employers are looking for something that might not exist in the market. And then, of course, we have geographic barriers, right? So in some instances, the availability of labor is not in a place where the demand for labor is. And so I think in my mind, what the government can and should be doing, first and foremost, is really playing that convener role. So it's understanding what exactly employers are looking for, what is the type of talent and skills that are needed in order for businesses and investments to thrive. And then, of course, addressing through appropriate training and education policy, so working with colleges and universities and other training providers to make sure that the right skills training is being provided that's going to be demanded in the market today and tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Tobin. MP Blakey. Now we're going to the Conservatives. MP Chambers for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Great conversation today with all of our witnesses. Appreciate all the perspectives. I'll go back to Mr. Dawkins on process with respect to some of the competition changes that we've seen in the bill. Some stakeholders have mentioned that they didn't feel like they were consulted. There was, of course, the consultation done by Senator Whetstone, but all of a sudden we found some language and proposed changes in the budget bill with little consultation on the drafting. Is that a fair perception?
Absolutely. And the problems of the BAA are reminiscent of a very similar process concern that accompanied the legislative changes to the Competition Act the last time we did this in 2009, which was, again, via the budget process. For example, some of the things that we're seeing now in terms of changes on wage fixing are unintended consequences of some of the Rush 2009 amendments. So some of these proposed amendments in VA reflect fixes that process, and they're an overcorrection. But what we're going to see, very soon after this, is need for legislative changes again in the future, and more importantly, because we didn't consult on some really key things I can get into more detail on about problems on that wage fixing provision, is that the government's not going to achieve its fundamental goals of improving the operation of the Competition Act.
Perhaps just at a high level, you might talk about one or two of those challenges you foresee in the future.
For sure. So let's talk about wage fixing. Now, there are very sound legal and economic reasons to forbid wage fixing and no poaching agreements. Price fixing, which has a criminal penalty with it, and wage fixing are very economically similar. But the language of the new amendment is overly broad and creates a lot of uncertainty. For example, there is great uncertainty about whether the term employee captures all categories of workers. And there's no definition of employer and employee in the Competition Act. So have they consulted with employment lawyers about the enacting of this? This is something that all parties who concern themselves about the state of employees should be really concerned about, that this is going to have uncertain application, and uncertain application with the other end being going to jail for over 10 years at the other end of that is a pretty serious concern.
And so, we are where we are right now. What recommendation, if you could say, here's what, you would be comfortable with, or you would leave a recommendation for this committee and for members of Parliament to consider?
So I'd leave you with suggesting one of two paths for the government. One is carving Division 15 out of the legislation. I recognize that a budget bill, those kinds of asks are pretty big, but we've heard a number of people, a number of others talking about that need for other provisions. The other approach is delaying proclamation of these provisions going into force until a later date, such as a year from now. The wage fixing provisions, the way it's written in the legislation, do not come into force for a year until a year after the legislation is passed. That can easily be expanded to the other provisions of these amendments. And that has a number of benefits. It's going to allow for consultation, proper public debate about what these provisions are going to do. And it also creates a very good set timeline for what the government has said and committed that they're going to do in terms of a second round of consultation. So give the competition law and other stakeholders a year or so to really dig into these amendments, not have, frankly, this is the only forum, and tomorrow at the industry committee are pretty much the only forums that we're having to debate these bills. That is not enough time. So more time, such as through delayed proclamation, can really help.
Thank you very much. I mean, we also have a second budget bill coming up in the fall. And so, we could separate these measures out and consult on them over the summer, at least give us some additional time to hear from stakeholders. Mr. Chair, I know you gave me an indulgence in the first round. I'll return my remaining time back to you.
Okay, thank you, MP Chambers. And I know great questions. We have a lot of witnesses here today. This is our final questioner. We're moving to the Liberals, and I've got MP Baker up for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And what I would love to do is to start by asking our representative from CD Howe, do you support the government's strategic policy review so that to ensure that spending matches government priorities?
Very much so. And this actually goes to, again, a question on process and what we're looking for in terms of outcomes. The spending review has to be very clear about the outcome that you're looking for, and this is going to be true in a number of different areas. So let me give you an example that abuts this, which is on the commitment in the budget, not in the bill, but in the budget, of a review of the shred credit. This is the most fundamental piece of taxation or a subsidy for R&D in Canada. And if the outcome is about improving it and being clear about how we're looking for growth, then we can make recommendations for that. So that kind of program review, looking at what are the outcomes and how do we improve the process, or other things like bringing in an IP box, are the key things that we should be looking at. And so that should be the primary goal, not for example, in like the shred review, reducing the amount that we're spending, but focusing on getting the best outcomes we can get.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really sounds like it's really about, pardon me, it's really about making sure that we're really getting best value for our dollars, right? That's achieving that when we're putting money through a budget, that it's that spending is delivering on the outcomes that we want to see. Okay, thank you for that. I would love to switch over to our representatives from the Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was about the Canada Recovery Dividend, which would introduce a 15% tax on the 2021 taxable income of large banks. I guess my question to you is do you support this, and why?
Was the question for me?
That's correct.
Could you please repeat it quickly? I didn't follow that. Sorry.
Sure. So my question was about the Canada Recovery Dividend, and this would introduce a 15% tax on the taxable income in 2021 of large banks. And I think my question to you is, do you support this? And if so, or if not, why?
Yeah, actually, I would support that. I don't think it's something that'll create an impact on jobs. I think it's when we're talking about income inequality, I think that's a perfect example there where we can go and get some money for our social programs, and where we can fairly tax people who are I would say less in need than the middle class, than people than the citizens of our country. So yeah, I would support that.
Okay. Great, thank you for that. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You've got about a minute and a half.
Minute and a half. Okay, great. Mr. Chartrand, maybe I continue with you if I might, and just one of the things that was that a lot of folks have been advocating for, that is dental care. It's something that we've made a commitment to, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on, if you could speak to a little bit more about the impact that would have on your members.
The impact that it would have on our members, I mean, many of our members are already covered by dental plans in a lot of the collective agreements. For the ones that aren't, for the ones that don't have that coverage, what it would mean is less out-of-pocket money. I mean, it means for them that they would get coverage. I mean, and they would be able to, get their teeth repaired. I think it's a positive thing, and I think that our members have the benefit to be able to have that in the collective agreements. A lot of people don't in Canada. So, I'm all for that it be a program that covers everybody in Canada, not just the workers that are unionized that would benefit from such a provision or such care.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much, Chair.
And thank you, MP Baker. And I want to thank our excellent witnesses. And I can't say it enough that we really appreciate that you accommodated in very short order, as I said earlier, to be able to come before our committee for this session. And just on behalf of the members here of the committee, the clerk I know has worked very hard to get you all here, and the many questions that you answered, the analysts, the interpreters, we really appreciate it. We wish you all an excellent evening. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.